Okay, we are here with Paula Rizzo. It's nice to have you on the podcast, and it's been interesting. You're a little different diversion than my usual guest, but I thought it would be really compelling and a great conversation to a lot of the people who listen to my podcast, who are a lot of people in the music industry and fans of people in the music industry. So I think all these types of fields, whether you're a producer in TV or a producer in audio or entertainment of any sort, it all interconnects to some degree. So I thought we'd have a really great conversation and find out about yourself. So welcome.
Thanks. I can't wait to chat. Yeah, a producer is a producer, no matter the medium.
That's right. So you're in New York City right now. Is that correct?
I am usually in New York City. Yes, that is where my home is. I'm actually in Miami.
Oh, nice for you.
I know. It's pretty great to be missing the winter in New York City, I have to say.
Yeah, because New York's been getting hammered just the last little while. So it's a good place to be.
I've lived there my whole life. So I have put in my dues with the snow and, I'm glad to be away.
Well, today we're getting some above freezing temperatures where I am. I'm outside of Toronto. So it's, I think we're like New York to some degree where the winters aren't as bad as they used to be, but they do hit every once in a while. And it's like, oh gosh, I want to get out of here.
We remember that time. Right. Exactly.
I love to be in Miami. We have a 2-week quarantine in Canada if you return back from somewhere out of the country. And they implemented this thing where when you fly in now, you have to stay say if you fly into Toronto, you have to stay at a hotel for several days at an exorbitant amount, like $2,000 for like 3 days to stay at a hotel. It does include food, but I mean, the food better be great for $2,000.
Yeah, so that's. I was going to say that better be the best food you've ever had. Wow. Well, I mean, look, it's smart. It's a smart way, but a smart way to keep you guys in Canada and not traveling around.
Well, so many of us go to Florida, Arizona, and California, wherever for holidays, and they don't want everybody going and coming back and bringing back more COVID. So how are things as far as your world as working what you do? I know a lot of your work you base from home, but as the pandemic changed what you would be normally doing a lot, or is it just kind of something you've made work?
People are much more interested in video and much more interested in productivity and working from home. And those are my two main topics that I talk about. So for me, this has been a really sweet spot because now people who I've been, shouting at about, hey, you need to care about video. Video is the future. Everybody get on board with it. Now everybody sees it. So for me, it's sort of been an amazing time in my business because I've already been set up virtual. My business has been going virtually, working from home or wherever I am for the past 3.5 years. So when the pandemic hit, I was already using Zoom. I was already, working with clients remotely. Even if people were in New York City, I do a lot of media training. And even if my clients were in New York City, I was making them do the training with me via video anyway, because I told them, I said, you need to be able to connect with the camera and be able to treat it like it's a person if you're ever going to connect with an audience. And it's different than when you're in person with someone, because when you're in person with somebody, you can feed off their energy. There's not an awkward delay. It takes some getting used to doing it on video. And all of those clients have come back to me since the pandemic hit. And they were like, we're so glad you made us do that because now we're ready to go. We feel pretty comfortable with the camera and all that. So, for me, I have to say it's been, an interesting time to have, your business doing so well when some other businesses are not doing so well. But I've, pivoted a little bit to be able to now teach corporate trainings as well, because now everybody is a video producer. It doesn't matter what your business is.
Yeah. So do you think we're going to stay in this medium for quite a while? Obviously, I think we are, but do you think a lot of people are going to stick with, especially with the corporate world and really not do the big elaborate gatherings that they used to do and stick more to online stuff? I kind of think that, but eventually it will swing back again as a novelty.
Right, exactly.
I know.
Being real in real life, it's so weird, oh, we'll do that again sometime. But yeah, I think that video and virtual, it's here to stay, and people have seen, look, both the benefits and the challenges, because there definitely are challenges. But I do think that the video element of it is so powerful, and it really can help you connect in ways that you can really bring your message to so many more people. It doesn't have to be just the people who are in that event or just the people who are in that room. If you're doing a training or you're doing a concert or whatever you're doing, you're opening up the doors to anyone. Literally anyone in the world can watch your videos or watch whatever it is that you're producing. And it's a pretty great way to get your message out there. So I think the companies and the people and the personalities and the authors that embrace video now are going to just be launching their career and their business, to the next level. Those who do not are going to miss out.
Yeah, it's sort of like the online market for like the Amazons of the world. Whoever had a retail business that had an online platform already or had got into it are doing well, but those who lagged behind that are having a real tough time keeping up with those that were thinking far ahead. So it's the same type of concept.
It's future thinking. I mean, there's been all of these studies and all of these things that have come out that if you have a video on your homepage of you introducing yourself and saying hello, the conversion rates there of people buying whatever you have to sell, buying your services, buying, your book, whatever it is, it just skyrockets because they want to get to know you as a person. And a lot of times for creatives, it's difficult because we're used to being, behind the scenes and letting our work, just, speak for itself and listen to the music or, watch the show because I produced it behind the scenes. We're not used to being the ones who are front and center.
Yeah, and it's interesting watching, especially a lot of people in the entertainment business, and I've seen some live shows on big networks where they're going to someone's house to cut away for someone to do a song, and it will be a big star, and you look at their setup, and the angle's awful, the lighting's terrible, the sound's crappy, and these are people who are in the entertainment world that are around TV people all the time, but they're just used to everyone else doing it for them and don't look at things the right way and don't look what's behind them or anything.
Sure, exactly. What does the setup look like? I in the beginning of the pandemic, I was watching, Dave Matthews was doing a bunch of concerts from home, concerts, whatever it was, from home. Yeah. And I think he was in like I don't even know, like his attic or something. It was pretty cool. Yeah. But he kept forgetting to change guitars because he was so used to having someone there who would literally, while he was chit-chatting between his songs, come over and change his guitar for him. Yeah. So he was so thrown off. Like, I just thought that was so like fun to kind of see the behind the scenes and remember, like, you know what? These things take a lot of people to produce a lot of the time. So when you strip it back and it's just you do need to become everything. You're the director, you're the stagehand, you're everybody. So to have that product look the absolute best, you need to put on a couple of hats or at least ask some people for some help.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go back a little bit and get a little bit of history about you. And so people who don't know who you are, who are listening on my podcast can kind of get an idea and background. But you definitely have a big TV background as a producer and that. But before that, maybe just find out where you grew up in New York City. You said you've been there your whole life?
Yes. Yeah. Always in New York and always, pretty curious and sort of obsessed with the news business. And, I always thought that I would be a magazine writer or a newspaper writer or something like that. But then in college, they make you take a broadcast class as just part of the curriculum. And from then on, I was hooked. I was like, you know what, this is quick. This is to the point. This is fast. This is now. And I fell in love with it. And my entire career has been in, TV news, in local news in New York and national news as well. And, I've won an Emmy-Award, which was very cool. And it's, it's great to be recognized for the things that you do, but it's been really wonderful to be able to help people tell their stories. And, at the local level, it's a little bit different than when you're talking about national news. And I was producing health and wellness nationally, which was really great for me personally, because I learned a lot. I learned a lot about meditation. I learned a lot about how to live less stressed and, how to be more mindful and all of these things that I was covering. And I ended up writing a book about list making and productivity and how to be more efficient, because as a producer in TV, especially, you have to be very deadline oriented. Yeah. And if you're not, you're just not going to make it. And using those skills that I had been using in the newsroom for years that sort of came second nature, to then be able to apply that to my home life and then share that with people has been, I've been doing that now I've been writing about productivity for the past 10 years.
Wow. So let's talk about, as a producer, I'm familiar with being an audio producer, and I've done a bunch of TV work, and I've seen different types of producer. But as a producer for news and segment oriented spots, explain that job, like what's involved in, starting, okay, I've got this segment to do. What's involved in the whole thing?
Yeah, and there's all different kinds of producers, and everybody calls it something different depending on what shop you were in and all of that, But for me, I did two main jobs in TV. I was a control room producer. So, when the live show was on, I was in the control room watching it all happen. And you basically stack the show. So you decide which stories go first and, what order they go in. And it's pretty stressful to be in that live environment as things are happening fast. And, there's tech issues. Sometimes the live truck goes down and you're about to have this reporter talk about whatever was going on. And then the live truck just crashes. So you're like, okay, we got to go to the next story. And so you're talking to your anchor at the same time. And it's just a very moving, fluid thing. Yeah. It's really exciting, but you can burn out really fast because it's very stressful. And breaking news is, it's awesome to be able to be in a newsroom when something is breaking, because everybody's at their best. Everybody is sort of, firing on all cylinders. So I did that for quite a while in local news. And, then I went on to segment produce, which is a little bit of a little vacation from that almost. Yeah. I mean, you're still very busy, but your deadlines are not as crazy for the most part, if you're not working for a live show, which I wasn't. So I was able to really craft stories and find the best expert to interview and come up with, from the beginning, coming up with the concept for what the story was going to be, doing the interview, finding the right expert, writing the story, and then working with a reporter or an anchor to have them voice over and then sit with an editor to see it come to life. Yeah. So you're very much sort of like a ghostwriter. People wouldn't even know that you were there doing that work and that you were putting it all together. And a lot of times, they think, oh, the reporter did it or all the anchor did it. And sometimes, depending on the market, yes, they do. But in a bigger market like New York, they have a lot of support to help as well.
So how long would it take if you're doing a segment? Typically, how long would you have to produce that and get that done?
Well, if it's a live show, you have one day. You have literally from the morning until your show goes live. So if you have a 5 p.m. newscast or 6 p.m. newscast, you have to, put it together, find the best that you can get in that time, which really does teach you about you can't procrastinate. You have to just it's done is better than, perfect. Yeah. So you have to sort of, get into that zone. That's been very helpful for me. But then, if you're working in a show or, I worked for a website for a long time, you have a little bit of luxury of time. There's no show that's going to show up. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's not like at 5 o'clock, you got to have it. So you have a little bit more leeway. From there it would take me, a week, 2 weeks. Some pieces would take me a month, depending on, if I could get the experts that I wanted, or if I could, get the interviews and things like that. So it does depend. It could be anything from you've got an hour to put this together to you have a month. It depends on the show.
What do you prefer? Do you like the really short, get it done, or do you like the the month long, and here's my masterpiece.
It is very exciting to do that, like news of the day, quick things. And I'll never forget when I did leave briefly, I worked for a production company. And I'll never forget, Anna Nicole Smith died. It just so happened. Like, that was the big story.
Yeah.
And I was running around in the office and I was like, aren't we going to do anything? And everyone was like, what are you talking about? Like, we all have clients. We all have different, it was a video production. They're like, this doesn't, we're not doing news segments here. And I was like, I think I need to get back into a newsroom because I still have that like news bug that I need to fill in some way. I enjoy both, but you know what? I definitely like to have a little bit more time. Because like I said, it gets stressful really fast when you're turning out those stories, night after night after night.
Yeah, I can imagine. What about when you're producing? What do you find the hardest thing when you're working with talent, when you had something to produce really quickly? What was the thing that you had to really work with? Obviously, you're working with newscasters that do this all the time, but was there one general thing that you always had to kind of, okay, you have to do this, you have to do this?
You're working with professionals, so that is definitely great. They know what they're doing, but a lot of times they're coming into this story sort of 10 steps back. Like, I already have all the background. I already know everything. So to be able to kind of catch them up and say, hey, this has to be said like this, or it's really important that we leave this here. Make sure when you're on the set talking about it, make sure you say this part. So to really give them what they need to look good and to also make sure that the story is told in the right way. Because when you're dealing with TV, some of those segments are a minute and a half. Some of them are a minute. It's a really short, condensed time frame. So that really teaches you how to be, as good as you possibly can to be able to get so much information into that short amount of time. But to have that communication with the talent is, that's paramount.
It's interesting with news, especially at Christmas or usually at the end of the year, you watch a newscast and they always do those things where they show the big long list of everyone who works.
The credits.
Credits.
Yes.
And there's pictures with their family and all these things. And I'm shocked like how long that list is. And it's like, how many people work on this newscast? And it just goes on and on and on and on. And it's amazing the amount of people that make one of those shows work. It blows my mind.
Absolutely. And every year when we would roll credits, it would, you're leaving however many, 3 minutes, 4 minutes for credits, or, I don't even know if it's that long, but it's long. In TV, a minute is an eternity. You know what I mean? So to leave more than a minute for anything is a lot, but it's nice to be recognized. People do not realize what goes into it. To your point, they just think, the anchor sits on the set and they just like make up the news. It's like, no, someone wrote that. Like, they literally went through and I wrote it so that they could read it in that way. And it's nice to be recognized that way.
Yeah, I bet. Now you do, obviously we'll get to your books, which I'm interested to chat about. But you do a lot of media training as well, from being a producer and being the one that's behind the scenes looking at people, and explain what most of your training involves there as far as a media trainer and consultant.
Well, everyone thinks, I'll be great when I get on video. I'll just talk about what I know and it'll be fine. It's not that easy. It does take work. And because people on TV make it look effortless, I think everyone thinks, it'll be okay. But it does take a little bit of training. So that's where I come in as someone who has been, working with talent for years to be able to help authors and entrepreneurs and CEOs and people who are now producing their own videos. So it's not only about doing media, which it used to be the big bulk of what I would, help people with, being interviewed on TV shows or podcasts or whatever it is. Now people are producing their own content and they need to learn how to look and sound better. Not only, looking and sounding better, but as far as audio quality and video quality, but what are you going to say? Yeah. And a lot of times people are like, I'll be fine. And then they do it. And they're like, I was just like, could I get to the point? It takes practice to be able to succinctly talk about what you know, speak in sound bites, and be authentic. That's the thing. A lot of times people are used to telling the same stories over and over again, and it loses something when you continue to tell it And I always remind people it's the first time this audience has ever heard that story. So you need to be really mindful of them listening to it with those new ears.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, a Broadway actor. They show up for the matinee and then they show up for the evening performance exactly the same because it's a different audience. So we need to be reminded of that a lot of times. But it's really fun to be able to work with different experts because I get to become an expert in different things. I get to sort of interview them and learn all about what they know. And for me, you know, that feeds my curiosity.
Yeah, I feel the same way interviewing people, and I'm learning stuff about people I never knew about or different tricks, and it's fascinating. I feel it's more of a learning experience for me than anybody else. And if you can take something in from that, it's pretty cool.
Sure.
So what do you find when you're training people? What's the number one thing or couple of things that you find that you have to teach over and over again that people are doing wrong?
Well, maintaining eye contact with the camera, it's difficult because you're literally talking to no one. You know, you're looking in that camera and instead of looking down at yourself, which is what many people do, because it's awkward to be staring into a camera when the person that you're talking to is now below you on the screen. But the experience for the viewer is so much better if you as the speaker are looking at the camera, because you're looking at them, you're connecting with them. If you're not connecting with them, then, you know, they can kind of lose interest. So whether you're using your computer camera or, you know, your phone, just try as much as you can to engage with the camera, and it takes practice to be able to do it in a you know, very authentic way. But it's what newscasters and reporters have been doing forever. Yeah. You know, they literally just talk to that camera and they know they're broadcasting it out to, you know, millions of people. You're now in that seat.
Yeah. Yeah, I see a lot of people, a lot of mistakes, and a lot of people I have on the podcast, I'll have them correct before we record. And you've probably seen a million times. If you have your laptop, they'll have it down on their desk and they're looking down into it.
Yes.
And I had the same problem here to some degree. I used to have my camera up in here and I had a green screen behind me and I have a big screen monitor up here. But when I'd be looking at the person I'm talking to, I was always up above the camera line.
Yeah.
Or same thing, if you're down, you're below it. And I started looking back and going, gosh, I'm not looking at the camera at all. It's awkward, you know. So who is that person looking at?
Totally.
So yeah, I changed things around. You
have to have that camera be eye level, you know, so if you have to use books or a stand or whatever it is to just boost it up a little bit. I should never see your ceiling fan. I've seen way too many ceiling fans while doing this, you know, and sort of frame yourself, you know, make sure that you fill up the space. You know, a lot of times people will have too much room above their head and, you know, we're seeing stuff that we shouldn't see. You're the focal point. So we want to make sure that you look good, and your background too, you know, make sure there's some depth behind you. Yeah. You can't always do that. You know, in my apartment in New York City, it's a small apartment. So I'm literally like up against the wall. It is what it is. I make it work. But whenever you can, try and give yourself a little bit of room behind. So there's something to look at and make it, you know, visually interesting.
Now, I chatted earlier about, maybe we'd chat a bit about this. We've all seen a lot of people doing online performing as musicians and singers and piano players, whatever you could possibly be. Sure. And a lot of them I look at, and I always find that there got to be a different place that you can set this up to look better or sound better or get you in, like you said, in the frame a bit better. You know, everything you talked about there is makes perfect sense. From the things that you've seen online, what suggestions would you have for if you're a singer, songwriter, or someone who wants to do a live Facebook show or Instagram? What tips would you give for, you know, making sure that presentation goes really well?
The first thing you should do is find the light. So where is your light source in the room? Yeah. For instance, for me, you know, I have a huge window in front of me. And I set up my desk right here because I knew I'd be able to use that natural light. And I have a couple of lights that I brought in, you know, they're not fancy. They're just lights that were around the apartment. But to be able to light my face so that you're not in darkness. So when you're looking for a location of where you're going to do your show, where you're going to do whatever it is that you're doing, find the light source first. And then set yourself up there and say, okay, you know what? Let's see, what does my background look like? What does the camera look like? But the light is the most important part, because you don't want that window behind you. If it's behind you, you're going to be very dark.
Yeah.
And it'll be very hard for people to see you. And even though you are performing and, maybe you're not singing, maybe it's just music. Okay, so the audio will be good, hopefully. But we want to make sure that the video matches, that it's a legitimate setup. You want to look professional.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because the last few podcasts I've been doing, since I've changed my setup here, and in post, I usually bump up my levels a little bit. And it's like on its own, it looks kind of groovy. It's got the studio vibe and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But lots of people now I'm connecting to, say like yourself, are in a very bright room, right?
Yeah.
Light. Most people have light colored walls. So I find now it's like, oh, well, maybe I'm too dark. I'm okay to be when I'm on my own and just shooting something. But when I'm side by side with someone, I really got to have to play with those levels a bit, make sure that, one's not super bright, another one's super dark and has, the
but
same type of vibe.
But this fits your brand, this fits your brand. This fits who you are. I mean, it's perfect for you, what you're doing, what you're putting out there. And that's part of this too, is to think about, what do you want people to perceive of you? And they're going to see that through the video instantly. They're going to know, now everybody knows what everybody's house looks like, what room they're in and what they're, if they have a cat or whatever, because they're running in the background and all those things. That's the other thing I will say. I think in the beginning of the pandemic, people were very, very, sort of like lenient about kids running into the background and dogs and cats and things happening. And now it's a little bit less tolerated. I didn't tolerate it from the beginning because of my production background. I was always like, what are they doing? So I had to learn to kind of calm down a little bit. But I think now the rest of the world is catching up, where those little distractions and those things that happen are, they're not as cute as they were in the very beginning. Now people want to, make most of their time as they're watching you or connecting with you or whatever it is.
Yeah, that makes sense. How often do you think people should be changing up their look, right? Because I see people online all the time, say even if they're a musician or performing, it's in the same spot every single time. Yeah. And eventually it's not that you're getting tired of the performance, you're getting tired of looking at the same thing all the time, the same background, same everything. Do you think it's important for people to be changing that up, or if that's their look, they should stay with it?
I think it should be the easiest, best look, so that you don't stress over that. You want to be giving your best performance. You want to make sure that your content is as good as it possibly can be. And so if you have a setup that really works, that you feel good about, that you can just plop yourself down and do what you have to do without too much work, I say go with it. A lot of times people will use a green screen, or those false backgrounds. And I'm not a total fan. I don't love them because they do still look fake. Yeah. If you're going to do it, you have to have a green screen. Yeah. First off, and most people do not have green screens, and they're using these virtual backgrounds, and then their arms are disappearing, and they're wearing green, and like all the things you shouldn't be doing. It just doesn't look professional. But if that's like part of your shtick, and that's what you're funny and you're whatever, then use it to your advantage. Then do that. If your song is about a certain place in the world and you want to stick that behind you because that makes sense to the content, then do it. Most people, that won't be the case. And I'd rather people feel comfortable doing it and not feel like, oh, I have to reinvent the wheel every single time and move my equipment and move my stuff and find the light and all of that. Yeah. I'd rather they just get out there and do it.
Yeah, get it done. What about video length? I know that's a big topic nowadays, and people say you should be posting videos, under 2 minutes or up to 6 minutes. And obviously it's different for what you're doing. If I'm doing a podcast like this, obviously you can't do it in 2 minutes.
Sure.
But it is interesting because I'm a podcast fan myself, and I find everybody's podcast I really enjoy. If I go watch their video, I get disengaged way sooner than I do if I'm just listening to it in my car.
Interesting.
Yeah. And, I kind of came with this realization just a little while ago, and I've started thinking I'm spending too much time worrying about the video portion of my podcast, where really a podcast is an audio podcast, most people listen to it in their car, or they're on their way to work, or and all those type of things, and don't really have time to sit for an hour and watch. I mean, I think it's great for the people who are really involved, or if it's someone they really want to get something from, or if you're putting stuff up as learning points and all that type of thing. But video engagement is certainly, video's great, but the engagement is pretty short. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, think about, the people who listen to podcasts. So obviously you are one of them. So am I. You are choosing to listen to that podcast. You have chosen it. You picked that particular show at that particular time because you are a captive, engaged audience. You're in the car and there's literally nothing else that you can do, right? Or you're on a run, or you're walking, or whatever it is. The multitasking factor is way low on that. Video is different, because think about how we're watching the video. You have to engage with the computer or your phone. You're watching it, and then you get an alert, and you're like, "Oh, something's happening on Facebook," and then you click over to that. And so there's a lot more distractions happening when it comes to consuming video.
Yeah,
but it does grab your eye quicker than any other medium, and if you're just putting a picture up or just text or something like that, the video is going to grab people's attention way more, but it does have to be sort of short. And this is what I work with my clients on, is to be succinct in what you're going to say, and to be able to have that headline point right up front. If you're talking about something, tell me what you're going to talk about. People waste so much time on their videos where they're doing all this like, oh, I did this weekend, and then no one cares. Get to the point. What is in it for me, the audience? I want to know, what am I going to get out of this? So if you think of it in terms of that, then you can sort of streamline what you're saying and get to the point faster, and it will hook people, because within that 15 seconds, if they're not hooked, they're not staying.
Yeah, especially if you look at your metrics, you can see that. There's a lot of people watch the first 30 seconds, even 2 minutes, and then there's this big drop off, and then there's the fans that want to watch the whole thing.
Right.
And that's your base right there, and that's what you got to really concentrate that too. But I think my thoughts lately have been on recording my podcast, that I'm going to just rip out little 2-minute segments to post on the socials and that, and keep that as
that's smart.
Yeah, engaging part, and force them to go listen to the podcast, and instead of worrying too much about having to watch the whole thing.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good idea.
What about socials, since we're going to bring that up? Facebook, Instagram, all those great things. I've been doing a lot of research on them, and doing a bunch of testing on who sees your product and your videos and who doesn't. And it's a real mess.
It changes every 5 minutes.
Yeah. And the process of doing it and posting changes all the time. And all of a sudden you could add this in your post. Now you can't. And
right.
What about engagement for people who are doing videos, say, or performing on Facebook and Instagram? What's the best place, do you think, in the socials for people to get their stuff across? Because we all know that you're limited to who actually see. You may have 50,000 followers, but how many people are actually seeing your content, right? You have any thoughts on that?
Well, where's your audience? That's where you should really make sure that you're posting. And all of the social media platforms, they like video, but they like native video. So it has to be uploaded natively into their platform. So you're going to upload your video into Facebook. You're going to upload it into LinkedIn. You're going to upload it, directly into Instagram. And then that way, algorithm apparently likes that this week. So that's good. So you want to do that, but also, make sure that you're spending time where your audience is, where people are going to want to engage with you, and uploading those videos. Like, for instance, LinkedIn can only take 10 minutes of video. That's it. That's the max. So you want to be mindful of that. Okay, you know what? I'm going to make sure it's a shorter video. I'm going to make sure that I don't hit that 10-minute mark. I'm going to hit the 5-minute mark or the 3-minute mark, and have these be, tips, or just, the thing about content And I learned this early on when I went from working from TV to the web, and I worked for the web for over a decade, and it was sort of new at the time. We would book guests for a web show. They'd be like, "Oh, this isn't going to be on TV," and I'd be like, "This is better. Everybody can see it whenever they want to see it. They don't have to just watch the 5 o'clock news. It's accessible forever." And at first people didn't really get that, now it's like, oh, isn't this also going to be on the web if you're on TV? So, but one of the things we learned early on was that you have to be very specific with your content. So pick one thing that you're doing, one thing that you're talking about, and just focus on that one thing. You can be much more clear and succinct with that rather than here's 10 things that I know about this topic, or here's all the things you have to know, or unless you're doing a tutorial, because that's different. If you're showing somebody how to set up equipment or how to, then you need some time, and people expect to watch that and pause it and go along with you and do their own thing. But for the most part, think very narrowly, like what is the most focused you can be on that topic. Maybe it's going to be a series of 5 videos that you're doing on something similar, but each one is its own standalone, and then that way it gives something for people to come back to, especially with social media. But yeah, video for me, I always think of it as my first way to produce content. Yeah. So, I do a live show on Thursdays and called Inside Scoop, and I interview people. I have that transcribed afterwards, and then that becomes a blog post, that becomes an email, that becomes tweets and things that we put out into the world. And it took me just that half hour of, in the chair sitting there interviewing the person. I didn't have to start with the blog post and then say, okay, but I'm going to do a podcast on this. Like the video gives me everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. How do you transcribe? What's your process for doing that?
I use a service called Rev. It's rev.com.
Yeah.
And it's pretty great. They also will do the, what is it called? Like the
closed caption.
Closed caption, yes.
Yeah.
So that you can, upload that. And that makes it great for social media too, or for whatever else you're doing. Because sometimes people don't want to listen to the videos. They just look at it. I mean, that's why all of these cooking videos are so popular, because you don't have to hear the narrator. You don't have to hear the person talking. You can literally just see what they're doing.
Yeah, because it's amazing when you're scrolling through Facebook, even though I do this all the time at night, before you go to bed, looking for some stuff, and you see a video and
Sure.
and you're sitting there, you see yourself reading what the video is about.
Yes.
And then a minute later, you're thinking, why am I reading this? Turn the volume up.
Exactly. I could watch this, actually.
Yeah. And it's funny that in a lot of cases with social media that the standard fare is that the audio is actually muted.
Yes.
Even though you can set it so it's always on. So many times you go through, and Instagram's bad for this. So something starts and it's like, oh, how come I have no volume? And you got to be turning everything on, and then eventually now everything comes on, but it kind of defaults to a muted no audio thing first. And for people who have audio as content, that's kind of a bummer. So that's where those.
It is.
Yeah.
That's tough. I mean, look, it was good in the world when people used to go into an office and you'd be scrolling on Facebook and you didn't want everybody knowing, what you were watching, what you were scrolling through. But now, the world is very different. But you're right. The people would have to turn that option off to be able to make sure that the audio came through every single time. Most people don't know that's a possibility and wouldn't do it anyway, because you just wouldn't.
Yeah, no, agree. Let's chat a bit about your books.
Sure.
And your first book, Listful Thinking. Obviously, doing some research on you, and I see that being a producer, you like you said, your deadlines, and you got to make your lists, and being organized is super, super important, and it makes you get things done. Talk about your first book and how that kind of came about.
Yeah, Listful Thinking was, it's list making 101. It's why you should, how you should do it, and, how you can set up your list, even if you are a list maker, how you can set them up better to be more efficient. And it really came out of me being a TV producer and thinking a little bit differently than other people, and not realizing that not everyone thought in lists and not everyone was using this tool for literally everything in their lives. And it became really clear to me when my husband and I were looking for an apartment. in New York City. And, I would walk through, I would see the apartment and I walk out and have no idea what I had just seen.
Yeah.
And, I didn't know, was there a closet? What subway was it next to? I was so like excited that there was a wine fridge that I just did not have any focus. So I started to treat that process like I would a shoot. If I was going out in the field as a producer, I would have a list of questions that I'd need to ask. I'd have a list of shots that I'd need to get before I went back to the office. And it's not that I would, necessarily forget or not know that I needed to do those things, but distractions happen. Things pop up. Your focus is shifted. So to have that sort of roadmap to go back to is so helpful. So I started to do that. And then I created a blog called listproducer.com and just writing about productivity and writing about, different tips and things. And that became the book that became Listful Thinking. And, it's been translated into 13 or 14 different languages. And I get emails all the time from people all over the world who are, just so excited to be able to use lists in a different way. A lot of students too, for school. That they're using them in really being efficient and really excited about it.
It's funny because since we booked you having you on the podcast as a guest, I started thinking more about lists and the fact that I don't do any. And
wow.
Well, I shouldn't say any, some, but very limited. And then I started testing myself where I would make a list at night or something. And the next day you kind of go through and you start knocking things off. And I found my day was way more productive. I got more precisely things done, where I'd always have a busy day and I always get stuff done. But then it'd always be 3 days late. Oh yeah, I got to go back and do this. Oh yeah, I got to do this. And oh yeah, what about this? And and it's a simple thing to think about, but it really helps your day. I mean,
for sure. I mean, it's an intention setter.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I love. And that's why I make my list the night before I leave my desk every night. And I did this when I was a producer working in TV. Now that I'm a business owner working for myself, I do it, as the last thing I do every single night. I think about what do I have the time and the resources to do tomorrow, so that when I come in, I look at the list and I'm like, okay, this is my intention for the day, versus doing all the things that come into your inbox that everybody else wants you to do. You know what I mean? So because, you might do those or you might have to do those, but you want to be able to be very clear about what is it that you really needed to do or what did you want to do. It's very different than just like fielding everything that comes your way.
Yeah. And I think it's a process of everything that you do, making a list. I'm big on making sure my emails are organized really, really well. Tons of folders, all broken down into shows and different, here's all my insurance information, or here's all my this. And it just bam, bam, bam. I try to keep a zero count on my emails all the time. And my brother was over the other day and that's helped me. He had trouble with his email. And so I looked up and I said, he had 10,000 unread emails.
Oh no.
10,000. And
most people do.
Yeah. I'm thinking, how can you have that number sitting there and not drive you absolutely crazy? Because that would drive me nuts.
I know. But I've had a love-hate with email too. I like to keep it pretty low number. I like to get to inbox 0 at the end of the day. There's something called the stack method, which I've just started using. It's stackmethod.com, and it was developed by productivity expert that I've interviewed in the past. And it's a really smart system. Everybody has their own little system, their own way of doing things. And for me, that one really works because I've tried it time and time again. And sometimes it's just like, you know what? And I've done this before, literally deleting everything in the inbox. Like going through and saying, okay, you know what? I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to pull out the things that I really actually think that I need or I have to reply to. And then after that, I'm deleting everything else, or I'm just archiving it all. So I don't have to look at it, so that when you get new emails, you look at it with a new eye versus just like, oh, it's more clutter. It's, why am I still on this newsletter list? I literally never read it ever. I need to unsubscribe from this. It gives you a little bit more perspective.
Yeah, I have a habit of clearing out my emails, and then once a month, I'll go back to the beginning of the month and go through and then get rid of stuff that I had kept that I really don't need.
Yes.
And, just kind of make sure everything's was put in the folder that it needed to be and go through. And I find if you don't, you can just get so far behind, and you have to search for everything. Who is that person? You got to search and find where was that email, and
Sure.
yeah,
You're behind. You're behind on it all. Yeah. I think about it as, do I have to reply to this? Do I have to do something? Or is this something I can send to someone else to do, to my assistant or somebody else I'm not the one to do it. You know what I mean? Whatever it is, somebody else can handle it, and I can just get it out of my inbox and get it where it needs to go.
It's funny, as far as email goes, I still don't think there's the best email program out there yet. I keep searching. I tried, was it hey.com? That was a kind of new trendy one. I tried it for a little bit, and it's like, oh, they have a neat way of storing things. No, it didn't work. I guess everyone has a different workflow, but it's sort of like, how come this is a simple process? It's just emails coming in. How come there isn't something that's just perfect?
It's so true. And I guess it's personal, right? And we have to sort of find your own way. Not everybody's system really works exactly right for everyone. Even the stack method, which I mentioned, I do it even a little differently than they teach. But it's okay because it works for me and I'm going with it. You know what I mean? So, sometimes we need to kind of tailor it to ourselves. It's the same thing with to-do list apps. Everyone is always asking, which to-do list app do you love? And it's like, I use some, but there's not one that for me is like, oh my gosh, this is the best one ever. A lot of times these apps and things, they try to do too much.
Yeah.
Just needs to be simple, and for me, I look at apps like drawers, and I use different apps for different things. So I know exactly what I'm going to find in that drawer. Because the worst thing is putting way too much stuff and then I can't find anything. I don't even know what I'm supposed to be looking for in there.
Yeah. Let alone if that app disappears or you lose, have everything in one spot and it's gone.
Yeah.
That's the big one. Ugh, yeah, I've had that happen in the past. You just, you learn from your mistakes. Yeah. Like you said, there are a lot of to-do apps, all those things. I find an easy trick I always tell some people. I said, if you have an iPhone, you got Siri. If there's something you need to do to remind yourself or do the next day, you just say, pick up the phone, remind me at 6 a.m. to do this. Yes. And it's so easy to do, and you don't have to get into an app. You don't have to type it. You don't have to do all those things. And bam, the next day it just pops up, hopefully, and tells you, what you need to do at that time. It works really good.
Of course you gravitate towards the audio. I love that.
Yeah.
Because it's how you think anyway, like you're already thinking in that way. That's perfect for you. Other people might be at their desk all the time and say, oh, you know what? It's easier for me to just type it in. But for you, you're always thinking audio, and that's a great tool. I mean, I do that a lot now too with audio messages and video messages to people, because I can write emails, but sometimes I feel like, oh, it's going to take me forever. And it doesn't take forever. It takes literally 2 minutes. But for me, it's like, oh, you know what? I'd rather dictate it. Or I'd rather do an audio message so they can hear my tone and so that they know that I'm not upset about something. It's just that, hey, look, I'm just explaining it. Or, you don't want that to get lost in translation, which it often can if it's text only.
I had a great client. I own a theater here with my family, and I book all the entertainment there. And I reached out to this show in Las Vegas, and I got a reply back, but it came back as a video link. And I'm thinking, well, what the heck is that? So I popped on, and it was the guy from the show. And he's like, hey, it's, such and such. Great to meet you. I just wanted to say hello and thank you for the email. And we're really interested in coming. And I just sat there and I was like, wow, this is fabulous. How come more people don't do this? And it was just, it was, now I felt like I knew him, and he engaged me better than anyone else ever did before.
Oh, absolutely. There's a tool called Vidyard that I use, vidyard.com, and it's actually a Canadian-based company.
Oh, cool.
And they, you can create videos on their website or using an app, and then you're able to send a link. So the link, you don't have to upload your video somewhere and then have somebody download it. Like, what a pain. It just lives on their website. You can click on the link, and I use it all the time with clients too. If they send me videos that they want me to review, or they have scripts they want me to look at, or whatever it is, I will often do a video for them so that they can see me explaining it so that I would, I'm able to say, okay, so here's how I would say this part, like maybe this would be more impactful if you said it like this. And so I can show them. And it's, it's great for new clients too, because they get to see you, they get to know you. And not a lot of people are doing it. So it really helps you to stand out.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Vidyard, is it called?
Vidyard, yeah.
Yeah, I have to check that out. That's a good idea. Yeah, because you don't want to always be uploading.
No,
videos.
And nobody wants to download it. Nobody is like, oh, I have to download this thing. Is it a virus? Is this a real person? I don't know who this is. You want to make it easy.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Listful Thinking was a great book for you. Did really, really well. And then you decided to come up with your second book, Listful Living. So tell us a little bit difference between those two books.
Yeah, so Listful Living came about a year ago. About a year ago. And it is a journal. So it's meant to be written in. And it takes you on a journey. It's a list-making journey to a less stressed you. And it really explores where you are right now with your productivity and your stress levels, where you'd like to be. So like, what is, the big blue sky, most amazing, life would be great if it was like this. And then how do you actually get there? Since I'm very practical, I want people to be able to, go beyond the dream and actually have some things to walk away with to change their lives. And I wrote the book because a year after Listful Thinking came out, I was doing everything. I went anything anyone asked me to do to promote that book. I was on every podcast. I did every speaking engagement, and I was working full time as a producer. So I was, doing both at the same time. And about a year later, my appendix burst.
Oh, gosh.
Yes. And there is nothing that tells you to slow down like an organ exploding in your body. And it does not happen to a lot of people because most people slow down, recognize the fact that they're, in excruciating pain, and they go to the ER. But for me, I was like, I don't have time for that. I have too many other things that I'm doing. I'm just going to go to the ER and they're going to tell me it's food poisoning. So I'm going to just I had diagnosed myself, which was a terrible idea.
Yeah.
And, even when they told me they were like wheeling me into surgery, I was like, you're sure it's not food poisoning? And they're like, no, we got it. Like, we got you. We know, And, unfortunately, I was in the hospital for 8 days. I was out of work for 6 weeks. It took me over a year to recover.
Wow.
It's a serious thing. It's like a dirty bomb going off in your body.
Yeah.
And it really made me reprioritize everything in my life. And everything came off my to-do list. Everything came off. And guess what? Things still got done and the world still spun.
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff was me and my ego that I had to be the one to do it, or I had to be the one to go, or I had to say yes to all these things. So when I reset my priorities into literally, how can I basically rehabilitate myself and be healthier? And so when health was the only focus, it made me really intentional on what I allowed back onto my to-do list. So that lesson is very much what I walk people through in Listful Living, is to be able to be sort of, have the blinders on to know what's your priority right now. And it changes. Yeah. It could be something, it could be a project you're working on, it could be, a goal you're setting or whatever it is, it could change. But then that changes every other decision that you make. What you say yes to, what you allow onto your to-do list, how you set up your business, all of that. And it's been really impactful for me. It's something I have to continue to remind myself of, and I don't want people to go through, a health scare like I did to be able to get it.
Yeah.
But I do think that now we've all gone through this experience of the pandemic and, being home and rethinking all the things that we used to be able to do. So it's actually a really great time to be thinking about, okay, what will I allow back into my life? I don't need to go and be at the same level that I was before.
Yeah.
So be intentional about what you allow back in.
Yeah, it's something I've been going through a lot, just even the last week, where I'm in a situation where everything that I am really great at is not happening. I can't go out and tour. I can't produce shows out on the road. We can't do shows in our theater. All those things that you're really great and you keep really busy at, and then they're all gone. But then you have to try to figure out a way to make that still work. So there's this whole thing where lately I just been trying to fire on all cylinders and do a million different things. And a couple of nights ago, I just kind of sat and said, you have to really put this down on paper and put some numbers behind everything and decide what really is a good thing to do, and what isn't. Because if you're doing 20 things, 19 of them are suffering.
For sure.
And maybe one is getting through. So are you better off to find that one or two things that is the thing and spend all that time on it instead of trying to do way too much at the same time?
Yeah. And it just makes it super clear on what you'll allow on the list, what you'll say yes to. If people are inviting you to go do this thing or this other project, or it's a no. Because it doesn't get you closer to that thing that you're working on. You have it in your mind set. So, maybe it's not a yes right now. Maybe eventually you'll want to do that. But you have to stick to your guns. And it really, in the book, there's also some exercises on how to say no and how to set boundaries and how to be able to, feel good about it and not feel like, oh, I'm letting everyone down because now, I'm doing this other thing. Because, we want to help people. We want to say yes. But then you're saying no to yourself.
Yeah.
So think about what would you be doing with that time if you were to go do whatever thing someone else is asking you to do? You could be using that time for something for you. And it doesn't have to be only to get you to that goal. But maybe let's say, health or sleep is your priority right now. You're not getting enough sleep. So if you're getting invited to things that are after, 9 p.m., this is hard for people in the music industry, but maybe you're like, you know what? I can't do it this month. I'm just going to say no to all these things. It's just already in my brain. I know I have to say no because I need to sleep. I'm not getting enough rest. And that way you already have the answer and it makes it much less stressful. Or even, how many events can you do in a day? I mean, this happened to me with video calls. Yeah. When I first started my business, I would open my schedule up from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and let whoever wanted to pick a time slot, just pick a time slot to talk to me. I was exhausted. I didn't know what I was talking about. Engaging on video is much different than just doing a phone call.
Yeah.
So now I know that I can probably do 3-4 max in a day for me to be my best. Because otherwise I am drained, I'm tired. So I stick to 3. I have literally 3 time slots in my schedule every day for calls. Yeah. And then I give myself a lunch break. I make sure that I give myself time in between to reset or do other work, because otherwise you're just going, and it's too much.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, I find myself, you finish a podcast and you run out, you got to do something. You go answer some emails and you run out to do this. And then you come back, I got to finish that. And you got to stay focused more on the main goal, the main thing.
For sure. And even different days of the week. I do different things on different days of the week. I keep Fridays for writing and for creativity. Yeah. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, I keep that for clients or for podcasts or for things that I'm doing. And then, Mondays I usually keep for catching up and work, actually doing things, on that day. And it changes, if there's somebody who's like, hey, I can only do it on this day or that day, you work around it. But to have that clarity in your mind is really helpful because then it keeps you on track.
Yeah, that's super important. I want to talk a little bit about growing an audience and your thoughts on that. It's an interesting topic. Obviously, I think it's easy to get fooled from YouTube stars and people who have millions and millions of followers.
Sure.
But I'm kind of a numbers person. I like to look at stats and it's interesting. I did some podcasting stats and found out some real numbers of actual common numbers of people who are at the top at their game. You think they're getting 5, 6, 7 million listens per podcast or whatever, but right. the average is way down from there. So it's interesting on perception of where you think you should be and what the average actually is. And just wanted to see your thoughts on growing an audience. And I know you're big on emails, and something that I've fallen short of. And it's listening to you over the last little while, I think, I got to step up my email game. And because you think it's not important because it's emails. No, who does that? But it's really important. It's your only real true contact to somebody. So just want to give you some time to talk about that.
Yeah. Consistency is the most important part of this in any content creation, building any kind of audience, for them to know that you're going to be in their inbox, every Monday, or you're going to be doing a show every Thursday at 2:00, Oprah Winfrey's show has not been on the air for years, yet ask anybody what time of day, in New York, what time of day Oprah was on. Everyone knows 4:00. It was on at 4:00.
Yeah.
And I just heard someone say it the other day. And I was like, of course we all know that, because at 4:00, we would all watch Oprah. I remember I used to watch it in the newsroom too, which was really funny. But it was that thing that you knew every day at 4, Oprah's going to have somebody on, or going to be giving away gifts or whatever it is. And you want that consistency. You want people to, expect that they're going to hear from you. And they're not only hearing from you when you have something to sell. That's the important part, because I see this often, too often, especially with video, that people only do video when they want to sell stuff. And look, video can help you sell, but it also can turn people off if that's the only time they hear from you. You want to be giving value all the time. 90% of the stuff that you're giving, just give it away for free. And then, the 10% that then you're like, hey, you know what? I've been giving you some free stuff for quite a long time. And now I have a book to sell, or now I have a concert, or now I have this. People are happy to follow you because they know, hey, this person has given me so much. So that's how I look at content. To be able to, yes, get inside people's inboxes is one of the most important lessons that I learned very, very early on. When I first started my blog years ago, this woman in publishing told me, a friend of mine, she said, make sure you get people's email addresses whenever you speak to a group, whenever you do anything. And I said, but what am I going to do with it? And she was like, don't worry about it right now. Just get the email addresses. And I was so glad that she told me that, because she was right. It's really the only way to bring people back to you, because there's so many distractions. They're on social media. They saw you for half a second. They're like, who was that now? And then you can't even get back to it. You can't even find it.
Yeah, it's super important. And as we mentioned earlier, you could post something on Facebook or Instagram and you think it's getting to everybody, but it's not. But with emails, you're pretty sure it's getting to most of everybody on that list.
Yeah, and they've opted in to receive that from you. So, for the most part, they're into it. They want that content. They've chosen it.
And I think important too, obviously you offer this as well, being able to offer some form of education to people is very important. Yeah. That they feel like they're getting something from you, that they're learning something from you. It's not always something that you're selling all the time, as you mentioned, that there's some education and something you feel like you're giving back. And I think for people who, especially in the music industry or maybe doing live shows or whatever, they're stuck to know what to do, being able to give someone a lesson online or talk about how you play the guitar or why you chose this song, and instead of always, here's another song, let's talk about something about that song, or give them something to, every once in a while, a little nugget back. I think those are great things for people to get.
And behind the scenes, people love behind the scenes, to be able to see into your world and what your creative process is, and how do you, people love this for authors too. They're always asking, what's your process for writing books? How do you create content? And I always tell clients who are stuck and thinking, I don't know what to do videos on, I don't know what to write a, blog post on or write an email about. I always say, what are the things that the questions you're answering the most? What are the questions that people are always asking you, that you find yourself, saying again and again and again? That's your content. Pick one of those questions and write something about it, or do a video about it, or, whatever. And that will get you, started down the path of creating the content.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. What about, we'll wrap up here in a few minutes. What about someone wanted to contact you to get some training or you helping them consulting wise? Maybe people in my neck of the woods who are musicians and singers and content creators and those type of things. What can they expect from contacting you, and what can you think that you'd be able to offer them?
Sure. Yeah. Well, really seeing where are you right now? So are you producing videos? What are you putting out into the world now? And then what would you like to put out into the world? And then how can we get you to that? And a lot of times, what's the disconnect there? Why are you not putting more out? Why are you not being featured in the media? Why are you not, or if you are, how can we get you to the next level? I have a free download if you go to paularizzo.com/checklist. I have a checklist because I can't help myself. I have to make checklists for everything. A checklist to become a go-to media expert. And media here does not mean just traditional media. Media means producing your own videos, producing your own podcast, producing anything that you want to put out into the world to be seen as an expert. It's important for you to be creating that content first, be your own producer, and then you'll get the notoriety for it afterwards. A lot of times, when I was working in television, I would be pitched people, experts who had nothing. It was just like, and it's like, well, what else have they written? What else have they talked about? Where's the evidence that they are the expert in this? And a lot of times it comes in the form of a book or now a podcast or that kind of content. So you want to have that there because I'm a big proponent of people getting media for themselves, traditional media, as well as podcasts and things like that, because you want to be the one talking about this the most. I became an expert in list making, not because I invented them, but because I talk about them more than anybody else. Yeah. And now, 10 years later, people still come to me, members of the media, and they're like, oh yeah, Paula's the list lady. She'll know something about this. It's stuck in their brain. I went in, very, very narrow to talk about lists. I can talk about anything that has to do with, productivity or efficiency, time management, working from home, but people remember me for that. So think about that. Like, what could you be putting out into the world that will be memorable, that people will think of only you for that?
Yeah, and I think that's great advice. I think a lot of people are always after the big interview or the big story. And that doesn't always translate if you're in a certain field. If you're a computer expert or say you're a musician, you should be really going after those podcasts and those different that are really just 100% about what you do. And it's way easier to get those listeners to kind of really concentrate on what you're doing because that's what they're interested in.
Oh, for sure. They've chosen to listen to the podcast. Podcasts are a much better way to convert clients, to convert buyers, to, buyers of your book, buyers of your product, but than TV. TV does not sell really anything unless you're, Beyonce and you go on a show and then you're going to sell a zillion books. But if you don't have that kind of background, TV typically does not sell books because, TV is not interested in being your advertisement. Yeah. They're not as giving as a podcaster is to be able to say, hey, where can people find you? What's your website? What free thing do you have? They don't do that in TV because they have a minute to tell the story and they just want a soundbite from you to say, hey, this is what I think about that. Okay, great. Moving on. You're lucky if you get your name and maybe your website put on the screen. That's it. Yeah. So to, really think about, where do you want to be seen? The thing about TV though, is that, you get some credibility there to say, hey, I did this TV thing. You can put it on your website and it can help you get more media.
Yeah. Good. We'll wrap up on a couple of really quick questions. And this is kind of just usually fun questions I like to ask at the end of the podcast. And one of them is usually, where do you like to perform, which you've never performed at before? But that could relate to you to some degree. Do you have a show that you've always wanted to be on, or something I wish I could, as a producer or as a person who does a lot of TV work, I really wish I could have worked on this or be on this. Do you have one of those?
Yeah, I mean, Oprah. Look, I love Oprah. I've loved her forever. I've always been a huge fan. I think it's part of why I did also get into TV, having watched her show and been engaged with her. So, I'd love to be interviewed or interview Oprah at some point in my career. That'd be great.
That'd be awesome. The last one is always food related, or it's become food related. So one of these questions, obviously you live in New York, a lot of great food in New York. If you had to leave just with your last meal, what would that be? It could be a restaurant, or it could be a particular meal, or anything.
There is so much great food in New York, but the first place that popped into my head is not New York. It's in Philadelphia. Okay. It's called Zahav. It's an amazing Israeli restaurant. And my husband and I would take the train from New York. It's only about an hour and a half train ride. Yeah. literally to just go eat at this restaurant because it is so great. It's called Zahav, and I miss it so much. We haven't been there, obviously, in quite some time, but oh my gosh, that food is so good.
Awesome. What about Miami? Must be some good places there.
Some good stuff here. Definitely some good stuff. But, I still find myself ordering bagels on Goodbelly and that kind of, goodbelly.com. I don't know if you know that website, but they will ship you literally anything from any restaurant, most restaurants all over the country. And it's pretty fun because, you get excited about your home stuff. So I had pastrami mailed in for Valentine's Day. That was our Valentine's Day treat, was pastrami from New York.
Awesome. Hopefully it didn't take like 2 weeks to get in.
No, it was overnight. It was perfect.
So what's the website? It's called what? Good.
Goldbelly.com.
Goldbelly. I got to check that out too. Probably doesn't ship to Canada, but.
Well, maybe. I don't know.
I'll check it out. Well, it's been awesome having you on the podcast.
Thank you.
A lot of knowledge there. What's really the best place to find your information about yourself and people to contact you if they wanted to?
Sure. Yeah. Go to my website, paularizzo.com. And if you go to paularizzo.com/checklist, you'll be able to download my checklist to become a go-to media expert and, find out more about my books and me and all of that. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor. And so I have a bunch of courses about productivity, how to set boundaries and that kind of thing. So, if you go to LinkedIn, look me up, follow me there. And I'm always happy to answer questions.
Awesome. Well, hang on a second. We'll say a proper goodbye, but I just want to wrap up the podcast. And thank you again. It was really, really awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks.